Yeah. So it sounds like you have this process by which you kind of, I'm sure you had to do interviews, you had to go take a, visit these locations, meet the people to kind of, and I'm sure that you could tell that story from any number of potential angles, right? You could have told it from what it means to run a place like that. You could have talked to it from the doctor's perspective. You talked from somebody just walking in their first day. But it's really about looking at all those different perspectives and trying to say, okay, what will convey most successfully the narrative you're trying to tell, right? And what is that process? Do you have a construct that you use? Do you have what do you reach for in your toolbox that says this will help me get to the story amongst so many stories?
Well, I think every medium, and even within games, let's just say there's many different mediums, right? Whether you're doing it for the Switch, or you're doing it for mobile, you're doing it on a desktop, you're doing it in virtual reality, you're doing it in augmented reality. I think you need to understand that every medium has its strengths and weaknesses,
Mm.
and what you choose, you have to see, you have your story, and then you have to see how the strengths and weaknesses of that medium will play, and what elements of it you're going to accentuate,
Mm.
which ones you might not,
Mm.
depending on how it would work. So, with virtual reality, it's very good for giving you a sense of embodiment and presence, and like taking over your senses. So it's very good for bringing you into spaces that you wouldn't necessarily have the privilege of going to, or could be more dangerous, or you feel more voyeuristic about it. So, you wouldn't, that's why a lot of VR that just kind of does like a conference room, or like,
Right.
like you're never going to be able to deal with people are just going to feel bored because they don't necessarily want to be there in real life,
Right.
uh, uh, but if you bring them into a space that engenders awe, or if you bring them into a place that they know they wouldn't be able to necessarily inhabit, then their mind, something exciting happens to them. So
Mm.
that's how, that's the pros of VR, and then I think, with games, in particular, how many first person shooter games are there? Like a tremendous amount, right? And you have to ask yourself why.
Mm.
You know, what is it that is making people want to do that? And I think a lot of it is the interactivity, the first person sort of
Mhm.
experience. There's something about, in games, about the satisfaction of a game mechanic, right?
Mhm.
and and unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever you want to say, people like that aspect of shooting guns. you know
Mhm.
and I think, but some of the best games I've played, that are not related to first person shooters, they still have something with the mechanic that is very satisfying. That it just has this sort of way of that. It's almost like a meditation. Like, for instance, there's a mobile game that I really like called Sky,
Mm.
um, which is just like this world that you explore. But it's just like you're walking through this desert, and you just feel the sound, you feel the feet. They've created this sensation where you just want to walk and explore this world, because it's created this mechanic that's very satisfying.
Mm.
So if that's the case, you would look at your story and be like, okay, I really should figure out what this mechanic is, and I
Mm.
should really be putting all my emphasis on that, because a lot of what those types of games do is really mechanics focused, and then the story can kind of build around that, because if you didn't have that mechanic right, then you wouldn't have a successful game, because there's something about what that does well and what people.
Mhm.
So, again, people are always trying to challenge these norms, challenge these sort of things of what the medium can do,
Yeah.
but there are general broad strokes of what it can work better for. So I think I'm always thinking, sometimes it's like, I think there's something that'll work well with the story. Sometimes I'm enamored by the challenge of a new way of like doing something. I'm inspired by another game, or I'm inspired by another content that I'm like, I want to do that. I want to figure that out. In my world, a lot of times I'm kind of the first person to try to figure some things out because I'm just intrigued what a new technology could do to create human connection and emotion.
Mm,
Right?
mhm,
I
mhm.
started out in 360 video, then I went into room scale VR that was, you could walk around. Then I went into social VR and figured out what is it like when you have another avatar and a person there going through the story with you. Then I got into spatial computing and really interested in about augmented reality and digital layers and using like your hands, in like a physical space to bring up, stories and experiences. And then, most recently, yeah, I've been exploring artificial intelligence and immersive sound, which I think is the kind of movie in your head and the emotion that you can get in dealing with certain topics. So, it's a two-step process in that way, but
Mhm.
understanding what are the pros and cons of each medium, and then seeing how that can then serve your story, and if they do, how specifically they would work, and what's the first thing that you would try to like, you know, work on. I
Yeah.
think that's what's really important. Like, what are you going to build when I actually give you $50,000? Like, what
Right.
is it you're going to start with? And I think that's really, an important question to answer when you do this too.
So I like that because a couple of things that you said that really kind of resonated with me is that, if I was to unpack the Gabo Aurora's methodology, the method. It's one of the things you really says. It's you talked about the importance of emotion, right? Finding that emotional connection, and then maybe that leads us to the story, right? Where what gets you going, and then what really pulls you in, and that leads us to the mechanic, and then finally that leads us to the technology. Is that kind of that through line of that those different states, and by identifying meaningful aspects and approaches to each aspect, the project almost built itself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think
And the story, I can say, maybe
I think
unfolds
I
itself.
think it's always story first.
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't this be a Netflix show or a podcast? You know,
Yeah.
because not everything is meant to be an immersive, but if it is, you have to take a compelling slice of it and
Yeah.
say that, I want to. I feel like that this would give me something it wouldn't have. And so like I think it becomes very clear in my courses and when I teach, we spend an inordinate amount of time on the design of it, and the rationale of why one would even do this,
Yeah.
and because I think it's difficult, it's expensive, it's something that requires, a lot of resilience and perseverance. So you have to make that case very clearly, because it's not just about you, it's about motivating a team of people who need to stay motivated through very difficult times to make something happen. So that's I think something that's really really essential.
Yeah.
But games, like just you know game design is more, it's everywhere now. It's kind of, all of social media is a kind of game design,
Mm.
get you to engage with it and to get you to stay enthralled with it. And so I think it's about understanding how a lot of those different things work with what you're
Mhm.
trying.
So